Good afternoon. I'm Tim Lynch. I'm your host today of the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association's Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you live the third Wednesday of every month and is sponsored by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Our guest here today is Wayne Thomas. Wayne works for the GLBTQ Domestic Violence Project. Wayne, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. Now, the last time you were on this show, which was a couple of years ago, it was the Gay Men's Domestic Violence Project. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. We recently underwent a name change.
When was that?
That was last month, actually, in January.
So, and what brought that about?
There was a recognition within the organization that we were serving more than just gay men or even gay, bi, and trans-identified male survivors of domestic violence. And so we wanted to let communities know that we're working with all members of LGBTQ communities and reflect the work that we were doing, and also make sure we were inclusive and that we would be a service for those who are kind of outside our target area in the past, so they know that they can come to us for services.
Well, that's great. Yeah, we went through the same name change as well, a little more than a year ago ourselves, for pretty much the same reasons. But why don't you tell us a little bit more about your organization? How long have they been around, and what do they do?
Sure. So next year we'll be in our 20th year of serving survivors of domestic violence. And we do a few different things. We provide direct services to domestic violence survivors. So that includes manning a hotline, so people can call our hotline 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Individuals can come to our Boston office for direct services and community-based services, so they can meet with one of our advocates or possibly even a counselor. They can do case management work, help people find housing, some other types of public benefits as well, or just provide emotional support. We also have a safe home program, so we provide shelter up to 3 individuals at a time here in the Boston area as well. And then we do some public policy work, both on the state level and nationally, and then I run the legal program. So we provide direct legal services, and either whether it's direct representation in court or consultations to survivors as well.
Wow, it's an awful lot of things. Yeah. Well, you've been around for almost 20 years. Well, why is there a need for an organization? Certainly there are a lot of domestic violence organizations out there, but apparently there's a need specifically for the gay and lesbian community, now the transgender, and the queer community as well.
So our organization was founded when a gay male survivor was turned away from domestic violence programs, which we call mainstream programs. Those are the programs that are generally focused on working with heterosexual women who are survivors of domestic violence. And when he tried to get services, they turned him away. And so he started the organization. It was a slow process, and so we've been building slowly ever since. And there's still a need in the state. Some of the programs, the mainstream programs, have done a lot of work to become very inclusive, to become culturally competent. And even some of them have opened up their shelters, for example, and they're serving everybody who comes to them seeking assistance, who they believe are survivors. But a majority of programs in the state still will not take men into their shelter, for example, or they may not take transgender individuals into their shelter, for example. So those are issues that are still going on here in Massachusetts. Outside of the state, it's actually a lot worse. Very few programs nationally will serve male survivors of domestic violence, regardless of sexual orientation.
And, you know, we're just the same as everybody else, and unfortunately, these issues affect our community as they do other communities. Getting back, this is a very brave individual who started your organization. Could you tell us a little bit about him, or is it?
Sure. So his name is Kurt Rogers.
Kurt Rogers?
He is still the executive director of the organization.
Oh, God bless him. Wow.
So
commitment.
Yes. So he's been very committed all along. And so it's basically been his vision to grow the organization, to not only do direct services, but also to have an impact on accessibility issues for other survivors who may not be here in the Boston area, or maybe even other survivors in other states.
What do you mean by accessibility?
So in terms of having an individual contact a program that might even be state or federally funded and ask them for assistance, whether that's shelter assistance or maybe even assistance with housing, and have a program turn them away. Maybe because that program thinks that women are a unique type of survivor of domestic violence and that they need to be focused on women only. Some programs are a little more inclusive in the sense that they'll provide some counseling to men, but they're not going to put men in their shelter. Even some programs that work with women who don't have teenage children who are male, but if they have a male son, maybe who's 15, even some of those women are discriminated against based on their association with a teenage male son, because there's concern that that male son might go into the shelter and perpetuate violence against others in that shelter.
So what do you guys do with respect to these organizations? You do any training seminars? You meet with them and discuss these issues?
So we do offer technical assistance for organizations that want that assistance. We do participate in roundtables and in different groups. Essentially, if you invite us in, we'll show up and we'll try to participate. So there's different groups, whether it's executive directors of domestic violence programs here in the state. There's a governor's council to address sexual and domestic violence in the state. And so Kurt Rogers, our executive director, he's a member of that.
Good.
I'm a member of the Services Accessibility Committee as well. So we're doing that policy work to try to make sure that LGBTQ individuals are able to get access regardless of where they may choose to go.
So when you say services accessibility, you're talking about your organization interacting with other mainstream, as you put it, organizations, trying to get them to open up more.
Correct, and also even state funders as well. So making sure the state funders who fund these shelters are requiring the organizations to be open to working with all survivors of domestic violence.
What do you mean by state funders?
So, for example, DCF, which is the Department of Children and Families, they fund domestic violence shelters here in Massachusetts. DPH was Department of Public Health. They also fund programs as well. So there are different state funding mechanisms that fund these programs to a large degree. And so we try to interact with those funders, the grant managers, to make sure that the programs that are receiving state money are also serving everyone who qualifies as a survivor of domestic violence.
The logic, I guess, being is that they receive public money, they should serve everybody in the public.
Yes.
And it seemed to me you're saying that unfortunately most places still don't provide it. And what are there any particular reasons they give for that?
Some of them, the reasons they give are that they don't have the capacity to serve all the women who are requesting services. So for example, even for women accessing shelter in the state, there's not enough beds for all the female domestic violence survivors on a night-to-night basis. So sometimes they justify essentially their discrimination by saying, well, it's a lack of resources. And that's a valid concern. It is a lack of resources that's there, but at the same time, it's a concern that they're turning away men who might otherwise qualify, or they may have a more hostile environment for bisexual women and lesbians or transgender individuals, regardless of how they may identify in terms of gender identity.
Now, if they do turn people away, I mean, at the very least, do they at least tell these people about your organization?
Sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't.
Oh, that's unfortunate.
You know, sometimes
they don't.
You know, and sometimes it's really almost an individual issue. You might have some individuals at some programs who are going to be very open, but the program isn't open itself. So they're going to make some dedicated referrals, share information about our program. There's a couple of other programs in the Boston area that are working with the same target populations. And then, unfortunately, some programs, they're just not going to be very helpful.
Are these programs typically hostile to the community, our community, or are they just very focused on their own mission?
It's hard to say.
Yeah. Okay. You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Our guest here today is Wayne Thomas. If you'd like to participate, please feel free to do so. Our phone number here is 617-708-3290. Again, 617-708-3290. Now, you mentioned that there's this council that was put together. Mm-hmm. What's the purpose of that, and what is it doing?
So the council is overseen by the Lieutenant Governor, Tim Murray, and has individuals from a wide variety of organizations, whether it's state funders, domestic violence, sexual assault programs in the state, and they are working in different committees on different issues that can come up. And some of them are focused on legislative issues. Some of them, like our group, are focused on services accessibility. And so we're looking within our committee at issues that are affecting LGBTQ survivors, rural survivors, immigrant survivors, elderly survivors, and the disabled, deaf, hard of hearing survivors. And by working together, we've realized that a lot of our so-called marginalized groups, some might see that, where we have either the same or higher levels of of violence within our relationships, but in lack of state funding dedicated to working with those groups. And so we've realized that there are a lot of commonalities within those groups, more commonalities than there are actual differences.
So they've pooled their resources.
Yes.
Well, that's great, and I bet they all have shared experiences that are helpful to each other.
Yes.
So you mentioned also yourself, you do legal work. What kind of legal work do you do for the organization?
So I generally represent clients and not the organization itself. Mm-hmm. So I work with clients. On my client work, I'm generally working on restraining orders and harassment orders, advocacy in the criminal justice system, family law issues, and discrimination matters.
So what kind of advocacy in the criminal justice system do you do?
So if someone is deemed a victim in a criminal justice system, maybe there's a criminal case and they were the victim in that case, I'd represent their interests to the district attorney's office, perhaps get involved and either push the DA's office to make certain arguments, perhaps around sentencing, perhaps get involved around probation or parole hearings. And
you're advocating for the victim, basically.
Exactly.
And trying to sensitize them to the victim's particular needs.
Right, exactly. And we're also trying to prepare the victim for what's going to happen in the case and prepare them for possibly having to testify or possibly having to write a victim impact statement, and sometimes preparing them for a lack of judicial response.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we also work with people who we feel are the survivors within the relationship, but they may be the defendant in an investigation. So perhaps the other party, who's the abuser, has falsely charged our client with assault, for example. So we'll get involved with individuals in criminal complaint hearings, in defending them in those hearings. Unfortunately, due to the nature of our federal funding, we're not able to provide any kind of criminal defense work.
But why is that?
Because our federal funding, which is through the Violence Against Women Act, is dedicated to serving survivors. And so as a result of that, they don't believe that generally individuals who are being charged with crimes are survivors.
Okay, so that kind of limits you.
Yes, in that sense it does.
Okay. And you mentioned in restraining orders 209A.
Correct, 209A, and the harassment orders are 258E.
What are those for the public?
Sure. So 209A restraining orders are orders an individual can go to court to obtain, in which they are going to seek that the opposing party would essentially stay away from them, not to contact them, not to harass them, and not to abuse them. The violation of those orders is a criminal punishment. So the orders themselves are civil restraining orders, but the punishment, though, can be criminal. So someone could essentially do something that's not illegal, like making a phone call to a survivor, but that phone call essentially is a criminal act if it's in violation of the restraining order. And so they could be charged with a crime.
And just so we're clear, the reason for the restraining order is because you've brought proof to the court that this person is being harassed.
Yes.
So whereas a phone call normally doesn't
Correct.
cause this. In this particular case, the person's on notice that their phone calls are harassing, causing harm.
Yes. The legal standard for a restraining order in Massachusetts is being in fear of serious imminent harm. And so generally, you're going to need to show some kind of evidence of either abuse or threats of abuse in the past to show the court that your fear is reasonable of serious imminent harm.
That sounds very complicated, and I imagine it's very difficult. People who are victims you have to prepare them to actually go into court for this.
Yes, we do. So we prepare them, talk about them what to expect in the court case in terms of the judge and the courtroom and preparing evidence. A lot of times individuals have, while they've wanted to separate or have maybe the police make sure that the abusive partner has left the house for the evening, have not actually filed police reports or have not filed criminal charges, have not done anything to create any kind of evidence of abuse, and therefore when they go to court, they have nothing to show the court in terms of evidence that there's been abuse in the past. So that can be difficult, and so we assess those types of cases. And I would say a lot of times clients decide not to go forward.
Is they're afraid?
They're afraid. One of the issues that can come up is that if they're going to lose, that essentially is empowering the abusive partner by sending a message to them that the court system is not taking this abuse seriously and they can get away with this and they can continue to abuse. So if someone has a weak case, I'd often talk to the individual and possibly advise that they not go forward with a restraining order.
It's very sad.
It is.
It's very, very sad. So a person like that, I assume there's counseling?
Yes. We have counseling at the GLBTQ Domestic Violence Project, and we also have informal support through our hotline as well.
Why don't you tell us, if somebody wanted to find out more information,
Sure.
where would they go? Is there a website and phone numbers?
Sure. So the website, the address, is both our former name and our new name. So you can access it through www.gmdvp, which is stood for Gay Men's Domestic Violence Project.org, or glbtqdvp.org.
Okay.
And we have a toll-free hotline number. You can reach it anywhere in the United States. It's 1-800-832-1901.
832-1901?
Yes.
And you said anywhere in the United States, so people from all over the country come to your organization?
Yes, they do.
That's great. You've been watching Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. My guest is Wayne Thomas. If you'd like to participate, our phone number here is 617-708-3290. So you've also have a fundraiser coming up. I do want to put in a plug for that because your organization does so much good.
Yes, we have a spring event that's occurring on April 11th in the evening. And so at the spring event, we're going to honor a survivor that I've been working with, and I believe at least one public official for the work that they've been doing on this issue of LGBTQ domestic violence.
And I mean, do you have any statistics to share on these issues that you're dealing with?
Sure. Basically, not only our own statistics that we've compiled through surveys at Pride events in New England, but even more recently, the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta has done a widespread search and survey on this issue. And essentially, we find that a quarter to a third of all GLBTQ survivors of domestic, or I'm sorry, all GLBTQ individuals will experience domestic violence in their lifetime.
A third?
Yes, up to a third at least.
Wow.
And for transgender individuals, it's even higher. It's over 50% of transgender individuals will experience violence in their lifetime.
Are we talking violence in general, or are we talking about domestic violence here?
For a lot of individuals, it's when they've reported it, it's been hard to differentiate.
Oh.
So finding enough individuals for surveys has been difficult, especially with transgender individuals. So a lot of the times the surveys that we do have are around violence issues, more broad than domestic violence.
And I'm curious, somebody calls in from, out of state.
Mm-hmm.
What kind of resources can you refer them to?
Sure. So for out-of-state callers, we can still provide emotional support. So that's the first thing that we can provide over the phone. We've worked in Rhode Island and Connecticut to build connections with programs down there, and we've created a resource database for those specific states. Then we connect individuals either with state coalitions in other states, and we've been slowly building our own resource database as well. So we're aware of some of the programs that might be somewhat similar to ours, or more broad anti-violence programs that include domestic violence issues in other states. There's roughly 40 such programs nationally. So we'll make connections into some of those programs. Unfortunately, though there are 40 programs nationally, there's still a broad number of states and even cities that don't have any programs. Boston's really fortunate. We have 3 programs here in Boston.
Wow. It's kind of a scary issue when you think about it, people who are victims and having really no place to go.
Right.
So we're really blessed to have your organization. What kind of, in order to wrap up, what kind of issues do you see nowadays or future issues for your organization?
One of the things that I'm working on right now is a discrimination case with regard to a gay male survivor who was turned away from a local program that provides, essentially connects survivors in need of facial reconstructive surgery. So individuals who have been struck in the face and need some kind of surgery for either internal or external injuries, and connect those individuals with doctors who are willing to donate their time, or dentists who are willing to donate their surgeries. And that program has only focused on working with women. And so we have a case that we're working on with regards to that issue.
Well, I hope you succeed, and I hope you continue your education
Thank you.
of these people so that they are more open. Well, thank you very much for your time here today. Appreciate it. If anybody wants, again, if anybody wants more information, they should go to the 2 web pages. That's www.g, I'm going to make you say it.
Sure. So one is gmdvp.org. GMDVP, Gay Men's Domestic Violence Project. That's our former name. We still have our website up.
It's up on the screen, which is good. Okay.
And the other is glbtqdvp.org.
And you have lots of good information there for our viewers.
Yes. We do have information about different types of services, and just help people identify for themselves whether their relationship is an abusive relationship or not. A lot of people get a lot of basic information from our website.
Yeah, it's curious. People don't know, probably, and It's a wonderful resource. Well, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
Appreciate you coming here.
Thank you.
And good luck with your organization. Thank you for tuning in to Legal Lines. Legal Lines is brought to you by the Massachusetts LGBTQ Bar Association. Tune in for our next program, which I believe the third Wednesday of March is March 20th for the next episode of Legal Lines. Thank you and have a good day. So you do great work.